expansionary efforts in Japan and the continued promise of a low-interest regime from the Fed, how are you now advising clients position their investments?
Overall, we would say that this policy announcement made by Japan may, in the short term, change a bit the flow, actually, direction for the Asian market. And we may see, and we started to see some sort of outflow out of Asia into Japan, I mean the rest of Asia into Japan. This should be relatively short term in our view. If Japan is really to recover and if we are to see actually a trigger to a recovery in the economy in Japan, the whole of the region in our view will benefit at some point because Japan has been delocalizing a lot of its activities elsewhere in the region. So Japanese entrepreneur would be more daring, Japanese consumer would be more confident, would be actually benefiting the rest of the region and probably the rest of the world. So this is a further positive to the global economy. As long as the US economy is holding as well, that would mean that two engines within the global economy are doing okay or recovering, and that would be positive for the economy but also for the investments.
South Korea is feeling the pressure of a falling yen. What impact does this have on Korean investments, given that investors there are also worrying over the North Korean threat?
True. I mean, let's talk about Japan first. I mean, the impact on what's happening to the yen to South Korea, the initial reaction is, of course, a negative one. People think that Korea may lose some competitiveness. Now, what we're going to have to see in a second time is just to figure out exactly what are going to be the benefits to the Japanese corporates. One issue that Japan will face is that a lot of those Japanese companies, they have to import their raw material, and they're going to have to do it with a cheaper and a lower currency. So whether the profitability of the Japanese companies is going to improve in the coming quarters, that has still to be seen. So from a competitive point of view, yes, Japan will regain some ground, but whether Japanese firms are really going to be able to transform this improvement into better profits, that has to be seen. And in the past the yen used to be a lot weaker, and that didn't prevent South Korean corporates from doing very well and gaining market share. So currency is one aspect that may play in favor, but that is not everything. So we have an underweight on South Korea currently. We are going to assess exactly what's going to be the impact of this weak yen. The North Korea situation is also an issue. But net-net, we think we're going to have to treat each sector one by one. Some core sectors will be affected, some others will not. And so at the end, Korea is still very much a stock-picking market.
Investors in China getting wary over reports of increasing bird flu deaths on the mainland. Do you think the impact of the bird flu crisis will be restricted to China and Hong Kong, or could it be a broader impact on Asia as well, say India indirectly?
Well, two things, on this outbreak. The first point is that so far it looks like things are relatively under control. And so we would advise not to panic, looking at how the situation is handled. And there is quite a good transparency about the progress and the controls which are set to prevent further actually contamination. So we're relatively positive on that. The second thing is that when you look in the end at what happened during the SARS period, the impact to the overall economy in China in the end was not that huge. It's quantified at something like 0.5% GDP, which was erased because of this crisis. That is important, but it's not critical. And we are definitely of the view that right now the situation is not as bad. So net-net, it's not going to lead us to revise our expectation for the full year. It may affect the second quarter sales for some consumer names, maybe, and airlines and less transportation, less travel, less tourism. But net-net, it's far too early, and it's probably going to be relatively limited. So the impact in the end will not be that bad.